Herzlich willkommen zu dieser Veranstaltung, die Online-Veranstaltung zur öffentlichen Meinung in Israel nach dem 7. Oktober. Mein Name ist
A
Jan-Philipp.
warm welcome. My name is Jan-Philipp Albrecht. I'm one of the board members of the Heinrich-Böll Foundation. Once again, a warm welcome to this event. I have a technical remark concerning this event. We have simultaneous translation from English into German and vice versa.
There will be translation between German and English. You will find it in the by clicking on the globe on the bottom of your window. Sie finden die Übersetzung auf dem unteren
You
Teil.
will find the translation at the lower part of your screen. There is the globe button, and I'm glad you're all here, that you're part of this discussion. I think this is a good moment to talk about those questions revolving around the question, what is the public opinion in Israel since the 7th of October? And of course, it is also influenced by the situation in Gaza and the situation of the hostages. It is obvious that since the 7th of October, nothing has stayed the same. It is exactly 7 months ago that Hamas and other Islamistic groups attacked Israel, and they murdered more than 1,200 people, and they abducted 200 people to Gaza. And this massacre has really influenced the Israeli agenda, traumatizing large parts of the population in Tel Aviv, in Haifa, in Jerusalem, and also in other parts of Israel, and especially in the south, where most victims were. The whole agenda is deeply influenced by that. Nothing has stayed the same. Israel is a small country, and everybody knows somebody who has been affected in the one or the other way, who knows victims or who's even in the hands of Hamas. Of course, the public debate is influenced by this fact, and the ongoing war has, of course, contributed to that. And of course, there are differences in opinion, and the priorities in Israeli policy have shifted, but there are protests against the policy of the Netanyahu government. And this was even the case before these events, if we remember how the protests against the so-called justice reform started. That means the rift in Israeli society is there, and the diversity of Israeli policy and public opinion and society is not always obvious in Germany and in Europe. We would like to make a contribution to enlightening this, clarifying the picture by showing that a society is in a special situation, and the conflict situation is not obvious, and the exterior perspective is not always the one and only. There are many things from within. The situation in the Gaza Strip and elsewhere are very special, and I am very glad that Tamar Hermann is with us today. She's going to talk about the development of public opinion. She's from the Israel Democracy Institute, and it is good that she's going to tell us about the situation. And Jörn Böhme is the co-chair of the New Israel Fund in Germany. and he will be hosting this event. And he has also introduced me to Israeli society when I was there for the first time about 15 years ago. And he really has a very comprehensive overview of the diversity of the Israeli population and public opinion. Once again, a warm welcome to today's event, and I wish us all fruitful debates. And now Jörn Böhme has the floor.
Philip, good afternoon, everyone in European countries who is with us in this online discussion. An early evening for those in Israel and Palestine, and a late morning for those in the US on the East Coast, an early morning on the West Coast, and a terrible early morning in case anyone from Australia is joining us. Very welcome to all of you, and many thanks for your interest. A very special welcome to our speaker, Professor Tamar Hermann, who I will introduce in a minute. My name is Jörn Böhme. I'm the co-chair of the New Israel Fund Germany. The New Israel Fund Germany is an affiliate of the New Israel Fund, founded in 1999, the New Israel Fund, in the USA. New Israel Fund supports civil society organizations in Israel which fight for democracy and the rule of law, for religious tolerance and pluralism, for more social and economic equality in Israel's society, and against the occupation. The New Israel Fund has affiliates in Austria, Switzerland, Great Britain, Canada, and Australia, and since 2014 also in Germany. Many thanks go to the Heinrich-Böll Foundation and the New Israel Fund Austria, with whom we are doing this event together. I myself worked for many years as on North Africa and the Middle East in the parliamentary group of the Green Party in the German parliament. And from 2006 till 2010, I was the director of the Israel office of the Heinrich-Böll Foundation. We want to talk about Israeli public opinion after 2023, domestic and external aspects. The situation in Israel is extremely volatile. For many Israelis, the 7th of October 2023 is not something of the past, but an ongoing horror. Yesterday was Yom HaShoah, the annual day of remembrance. Next week will be Yom HaZikaron, the memorial day for the fallen soldiers of the wars of Israel and victims of actions of terrorism. And on the following day, Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel's 76th Independence Day. Over 100 hostages are still in the hands of Hamas and Islamic Jihad. Today is the 214th day of a war with an incredible number of dead, wounded, missed, and traumatized Palestinians, and vast destruction of buildings and infrastructure in the Gaza Strip. There are news about an invasion into Rafah. At the same time, there are news of a possible ceasefire. There are news of a possible hostage deal, and at the same time, there are speculations about efforts to sabotage such a deal. We want to better understand the situation in Israel since October 7th, 2023, to better understand the people living in this situation. We want to talk about polls, the result of polls, the answers of young and old people, of males and females, of religious and non-religious people, of Jewish and Palestinian Israelis. How do they look back at October 7th, 2023? Whom do they hold responsible for the horrors of that day? How do these horrors impact the feeling of security? How do Israelis view their government and possible new elections? How do they view the war in Gaza and the fate of the hostages? Are there any thoughts about political plans as how to deal with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in the future? And many more questions that arise in the given situation. However, looking at the situation, at this very dynamic situation, this extremely exceptional situation begs the question, how reliable are the numbers that appear to be static in such dynamic and violent circumstances? How careful do we have to deal with them? We are honored that we have with us one of the leading persons conducting opinion polls in Israel, Professor Tamar Hermann, and I would like to thank her very much, also in the name of the Heinrich-Böll Foundation and the New Israel Fund Austria, for being with us, giving us your time and sharing your expertise with us. Professor Hermann is following and analyzing opinion polls in since decades. She's Senior Research Fellow at the Israel Democracy Institute and Academic Director of the Viterbi Family Center for Public Opinion and Policy Research. Before we start, I would like to give you some technical information. Tamar Hermann will start the session with an input of about 20 minutes. With some questions from my side, the audience will then have almost half an hour for questions and input. Please use the Q&A button for your question, not the chat function. Your questions will be collected and passed on to me by someone from the Böll Foundation, and I will try to include as many as possible in the talk with Tamar. And now, without further ado, the floor is yours, Tamar. Please.
Hi. Thank you, Jörn. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. I worked in the past very closely with the Heinrich-Böll Foundation on many occasions, and I'll do my best in order to frame in a dynamic way what's going on in Israel. I'll use public opinion polls, but not only, because numbers are very important, but it's always important, even more important, to be aware of the context in which the answers were given. As it was already mentioned, we actually are in a situation where people are confused. Former views were shattered on October 7th and its aftermath. And we actually cannot talk about an Israeli public opinion. We can talk about public opinions or public's opinion in Israel, because people indeed gather in certain groupings, but even within these groupings, we see many disagreements on certain issues while agreeing on other issues. So I'll try and explain how comes that eventually we can talk about a kind of a climate of opinion in Israel, in such a, as Jörn mentioned, a volatile situation. So, as was mentioned at the opening comments, October 7th came after about 9.5 months of real grassroots protest wave that was initiated by a variety of civil organizations as a reaction to the blueprint of the government to introduce a judicial reform, which was meant to change the balance of power between the executive branch mainly and the judiciary. These were the two bodies or branches of government which the Netanyahu government aimed to change. I have to explain here that the reasoning given by the government, but also by many in Israel, for this reform that was highly likened by great parts of the Israeli public, was that the judiciary took upon itself many of the decisions that should have been done by the executive and the legislative bodies. In other words, the competing rivals in this disagreement, which turned into a real, I would say, a campaign by the government and against the government, was about the interpretation about the correct balance of power between the different branches of the Israeli, I would say, regime. Okay? So you shouldn't be too influenced by the fact that the media mostly covered the protests in the streets of Tel Aviv and deduce that all Israelis agree that it was wrong. It was not the government against the people. It was the government against certain parts of the Israeli public. And I can generalize and say they were the more educated, the more secular, residents of Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Haifa, and the other large cities, people who were better off economically. Many of them were of Ashkenazi, meaning European descent. So it turned quite quickly into a kind of, I would say, even a class struggle in a way, but class in the more I would say, flexible meaning of this term. And why am I dedicating a couple of minutes in order to explain it? Because this segment is now the segment that is struggling against the government on the issue of the Gaza war, the hostages, and so on and so forth. It is not that the first wave of protests declined, and then we had this October 7th, and a new wave started. But these are mainly the same people. And therefore, by the other side, they are being suspected as continuing the same protest by focusing on different issues, that their protest is not aimed at specific ad hoc issues, but they are trying to use the war and the hostages as a vehicle to topple the government. Okay? So we should understand that it is not that the war actually cut the Israeli, I would say, stream of life and moved from the anti-judicial reform protest into the Gaza-related, hostages-related issues, but actually there is a continuation here. And the continuation makes all the discussion regarding the Gaza war basically political, in the sense that we see the left and large parts of the center standing on one side, and the center right and the right and the radical right on the other side. In order to give you the numbers, I will tell you the left as of now in Israel, by self-definition, is 13%, 13%. Center is about 27, sometimes 30%. So taken together, the left and the center are less than half of the Jewish population in Israel, politically speaking. The right is about 55% or 60%, depending on the specific issue. And the Israeli Arabs, or some of you may prefer the term Israeli Palestinians, are out of this game. They are out of this game because they cannot relate to the agenda of the mainstream left. The mainstream left is still Zionist, whereas most Arabs, of course, or Israeli Palestinians are non-Zionist. Okay? And on various issues, for example, issues of modernity, women's rights, LGBT rights, they are much closer to the Israeli right. They are much closer to Shas, for example, on many issues, than to the Israeli liberal Zionist left. Okay, so the situation is much more complicated than it looks from just reading the media. So I'll start sharing with you my presentation, and I'll go on explaining what's going on in here. Do you see the presentation? Yeah. Okay. So that's the first slide, which actually shows you two questions that we've been measuring. I show you here only from January 22, but we have previous measurements until December 2018. And as you can see, We have one question regarding how optimistic you are regarding the future of Israel's national security. This is the dark green line, and how optimistic you are regarding the future of the democratic rule. In both cases, the result is of 2 days ago. This is March. We see about 1/3 only are optimistic about these two issues, and it's very, very critical to keep this in mind, that the majority are pessimistic. When we try to figure out whether these are the same people, those who are optimistic on one issue and the other issue, we see that the optimistic are not necessarily optimistic on the two issues, but the pessimists are really pessimist on the two accounts. Okay, then we asked our interviewees to which extent do they feel safe? What's the level of the personal security? As you can see, the Arabs, about half are saying no, they are not, they don't feel secure, 49%, almost half. Only 16% say that they feel pretty secure, and this should be kept in mind because they feel secure or insecure not because of the war in Gaza, but because of their situation within Israel. On the Jewish side, the picture is different. We have a plurality, 43% who say yes, we feel very or fairly or very high level of personal security. This is early April, okay? But when we segment the answers by the three political orientations, we see that on the left, the plurality, almost the plurality says fairly or very low sense of personal security or so and so. Whereas on the right, we see 50% saying, yes, we feel secure. Okay, so even this personal issue of personal security is being seen differently by the segments within the Jewish majority group, which are the Jewish Israelis. Okay, if people don't feel secure, we ask them, okay, shall we hold elections in order either to reaffirm the control of the government, or should we conduct elections in order to replace the government? Now, as you can see, amongst the Arabs, there is a majority saying elections now in 2024. Amongst the Jews, it is less than half. And if we go by the political orientations, we see that almost all people who define themselves as being on the left say, yes, we should have elections this year. Center is more skeptical. Only 68% are saying, yes, we should hold elections now. And on the right, they prefer to postpone the elections until the government ends its term in 2026. Remember, I told you that the right is about 60%, 55 to 60% of Israeli public opinion. So there isn't a consensus within Israel that we should conduct elections. Obviously, the left is willing or wishing to have elections as soon as possible because they believe that the elections will bring out a new government. But this is not guaranteed in any way, okay? It might, they might say that this government is the worst and therefore any other government will be better, but we don't know that. So holding new elections involve a certain kind of risk for the center and the left, because if a new right-wing government, even if less radical than the one that we are having now, will be re-elected, this would actually pull the rug from under the feet or the argument that the government is illegitimate from the public opinion point of view. So it's based on expectations, but we cannot guarantee that elections will end with a new type of government, maybe with a new composition of the government, but not necessarily a new type of government, and Netanyahu may be elected again. So this should be kept in mind. Okay, we also ask, do you think that the government will actually finish its term? Oops. Sorry. Okay, and what we see is that on the right, the plurality say, yes, it's going to complete its term in office. The left, only 20% think so. At the center, 24%. So it's all about expectations. Who is responsible for the failure of October 7th? And should they resign? Of course, on the left, we see again this large majority, and amongst the Arabs, of course, saying, yes, they should resign immediately, and so is the center. This is not acceptable by the right. Okay, so until now, you had the overall state of mind and the fact that it is highly divided. Now, let's move to the issue of an independent Palestinian state. We are now at one of the lowest points ever in terms of support for of the Israeli Jewish public in the establishment of an independent Palestinian state. However, again, we see the difference. 3/4 of the Israeli Arabs saying, yes, we support. 77% of the Jewish left, only 43% by the center, and 16% only by the right. Okay? So the establishment of a Palestinian state, not necessarily in practice, but also in principle only, is supported by less than 1/3 of the Israeli Jewish public, and therefore all plans that are being put on the table now by the Biden administration, or in the context of a regional security treaty, or by any other international actors, the UN or the EU, and so on and so forth, it comes in a very low point in the principled support of the public, in Israeli Jewish public in general, in the establishment of an independent Palestinian state. And if you ask me why do so many Israelis, Israeli Jews resent the idea? We ask them how will this affect the Palestinian terrorism against Israel? So as you can see on the left, they say, well, terrorism will weaken but will not cease. So even if a peace treaty is signed, even the left is expecting to have a certain level of terror, maybe less than today, but still as a phenomena that exists. The center is divided about 1/3, with 13% saying we don't know. And the right 60%, 59.5, saying it will increase. Okay, it will become stronger. So you can understand or follow, even if you do not accept this logic. But if the logic says we are going to see more terror, people who are expecting more terror will not support the establishment of a Palestinian state. Okay, what about a regional defense agreement? Again, the Arabs are strongly for. left strongly for, right, very few are supportive, and also the center is not supportive of that. So about 1/4 of the Jews are accepting an establishment of a Palestinian state in the context of a regional defense agreement. This is what to do with Gaza, but I'll skip that. Basically, Israelis do not want to stay in Gaza. They would like to have a military control over what's going on in Gaza, but they will prefer to have an international, some kind of a force there. Now we get to a very critical question. The question is about the suffering of the Palestinians, okay? We asked this question, and I have to say that it's very difficult for me to show you the results. About 80% of the Jews in October 23, December 23, and again in March 24, 80% are saying no. We shouldn't take the suffering of the Palestinians into account in making operational plans. And I should say that this has to do with the hostages that we will talk about in a minute, because the suffering of the Palestinians is equated in the average Israeli Jewish person with the suffering of the hostages, okay? And if we'll come to the point where the hostages will be released, I'm sure that we will see a very different picture. What I want to show you that even on the left, the left is almost divided between those who are saying we should take it or we shouldn't take it into consideration. I'm not expecting that the right would be empathic to the Palestinians, but the left also, the Jewish left, also here, starting in October, but also in March, 50-50 almost, saying, no, this should not be a consideration. And now many people are saying, well, why should we be surprised? They don't see it on TV, they don't see it on the main media channels in Israel. This is not true. We asked them on April, have you seen or not seen pictures or videos, any visuals showing the widespread destruction in Gaza? And as you can see, very few didn't see anything. Most of them see a few pictures or videos, and actually on the right, more than at the center and the left, almost 40% say, yes, we saw what's happening there. This doesn't bring them to the point where they want to take the suffering of the Palestinians into consideration. And as I said, it is related to the issue of the hostages. Americans, should Israel agree to a two-state solution in order to receive American assistance? Most Israelis say yeah. No, the two-state solution is a big no, and even if it will cost us with the American support. Then should Israel or do the Israeli leaders, do they do their utmost in order to release the hostages? As you can see on the right, a large majority are saying, yes, they are doing their best. Of course, the left doesn't believe it, and the center also. But it is not that there is a consensus that Netanyahu is impeding the release of the hostages based on his personal considerations. The right, as I said, 60% are saying that the government is doing its utmost to do it. Now, can we rely on the Americans? No, not necessarily. And here, the Jews and the Arabs are quite similar. If we ask the left, then we see that even the left is not of one opinion on that issue. Should Israel act upon the American administrations or the Israeli leaders? And we see that amongst the Jews, the majority wants to act by the good judgment in the view of the Israeli leaders. Okay, and this is from a day before yesterday, and it's very critical for me to show that, because we thought about the juxtaposition of the Holocaust and the events of October 7th. And what we saw, that a majority are saying yes. The comparisons between the Holocaust and October 7th is based on reality. And now when we ask, or when we segmented the answers by the three main political bodies, we saw almost equal share and a majority in all three camps saying that the comparison is not baseless, that we should we should compare. Now I'll stop sharing, but I'll explain or answer some of your questions. I'll start by gender. Is gender a factor in Israeli public opinion? In most cases, no. We see that gender hardly plays any role. However, there is one question where we found out in the very last few days a big difference, and this is about the relative importance of a military move in Rafah as opposed to signing a deal to release the hostages. Here we saw many more women opting for the signing of a deal in order to release the hostages compared to men. Even within the political blocks or camps, and most importantly, within the right, we saw that women who define themselves as being on the right are more supportive of a deal than the men of the right. So although they support such a deal less than women in the center and on the left, but compared to the men in the political camp, they are much more supportive of the releasing of the hostages with the cost that such a move entails. As for the younger age cohorts, in Israel, the youngest and the younger age cohorts are more to the right than their parents and their grandparents. And this has one explanation, or actually two explanations. One explanation is that they are more to the right because they are more religious or ultra-Orthodox. And we know that in Israel, the overlapping between level of religiosity and political orientation is amazingly strong. It is almost like in physics, you know, the apple always falls down, it never goes up. Young people stay in the same political camp in most cases, like their fathers and the extended families, okay? If they come from religious families who are mostly on the right, or the ultra-Orthodox families who are almost entirely on the right, and if there are more youngsters coming from these two groups, of course, the overall youngest age cohort is more to the right. And as they are more to the right, there are of course there are young people on the left, but as the left is stronger and there are less kids in secular leftist families, the trajectory, the demographic trajectory, and with it the political trajectory is clear. So even if we are going to have elections tomorrow, do not expect to see an upside down result of the elections. If we look on income and education, the overlapping between income, education, politics, and level of religiosity, we do see a difference of which I mentioned at the beginning. The right is poorer, less educated, more at the periphery, and voting more for right-wing parties, be them more moderate like Likud or Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. Okay, so the situation in a way is back to where it was in early 2023 in terms of the cleavages within Israeli society. At the beginning, after October 7th, people believed that we will see a total, new mixture of political views. There was this slogan which said, "Together we will win." And however, I started, and I suppose that I was not alone, sensing that the basic situation and the basic rifts are still there in a month after October 7th. And as we see now, from this perspective, we are in the same place. There was an expectation that the soldiers that will come back from the war will join the protesters or even issue their own protest the way it happened in October 73 after the Yom Kippur War. It didn't happen. We don't see new groupings joining the there is not an anti-war protest. There is an anti-government protest because all Israelis who were called upon to join the IDF actually joined the IDF. We didn't see any refusal of significant proportions. Okay, so basically, it's not an anti-war. There is no protest against the war. There is a protest against the way that it is being conducted by the government. And a demand to release the hostages. We asked a couple of days ago, as I mentioned, Rafah or the hostages. In the overall Jewish population, it is 55% saying the hostages and 39% saying Rafah. Of course, left and right play as it is expected, but the hostages, the release of the hostages doesn't mean that these people support the cessation of the war unless there is some military solution to the security threats coming from the north and from the Gaza Strip. I think I've exhausted my 20 minutes.
Quite a bit, yeah. Thank you so much, Tamar. A lot of food for thought indeed. I would like to encourage the audience, even though we don't have much time left, to raise your questions in the Q&A button. And until that happens, I want to jump in with 3 questions concerning to what you said. If I understand it correctly, quite a few people feel personally secure despite of what happened. My question is, did you do any special polling of the people that had to leave their places of living in the south and in the north? And I understand these are still tens of thousands of people who have not been able to go back to their homes and the first question, and I will say the other 2 also, and then you can jump in again.
Okay.
The second one is, I understand that given the numbers of the left, center, and right that you mentioned, there are not so many people, after all, who demand elections. And how does that go together with a poll that was...
Who demand?
Who demand new elections soon.
Okay.
And how does that go together with the result of a poll by Yediot Ahronot, the daily newspaper, that 85% of the questions don't trust the government or only trust it minimally? And the third question, in connection with the numbers that you gave concerning the idea of a Palestinian state next to Israel, that very few people still support this idea. Information about what kind of people have in terms of the future of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, how that should be dealt with.
Okay, I'll be very brief. It's impossible almost to get to the evacuees in the south and in the north because very typically to the Israeli bureaucracy, we don't really know where people are. I mean, they move from one place to another, they go to their aunt, they go to the hotel, they go whatever. But we do know that certainly their sense of security is lower, and it's all lower on certain accounts. The fact that they have experienced attacks from Gaza or from the north, and some of them are not going to go back. Okay, they are saying it openly that they would stay at the center or wherever. But you know, the country is so small that the differences are more in the mind than in reality, because we saw the missiles coming from Iran, and where they not stopped, they could have hit Tel Aviv and Haifa and Jerusalem the same way. So it is more on the psychological level, and we do know that on the south, people are going back. I mean, some of them are going back because they don't have any other option, because the government stopped or will stop paying for their accommodation and so on and so forth. And September 1st, the school year starts, and the kids should be back home and so on and so forth. So there are very embryonic research projects about the evacuees or the dislocated people, and we do see them in a much worse situation psychologically. However, in our poll, 70% of the people who responded said that they are back to, I would say, a new normal. So if you stroll through the streets of Tel Aviv, all restaurants are open, people are going to the theater. There is some heaviness in the air, but people are conducting quite normal way of life. How can it be that people do not trust the government, and still less of them want to have no elections? To start with, I'm not responsible for some other pollsters' numbers, but I do believe that many Israelis, a majority, do not trust the government. However, many Israelis are of the opinion that there is no great difference between this right-wing government and that right-wing government. They expect to have a right-wing government. So some of them say, why bother with elections? Maybe we should wait until things will, in a way, come to fruition, and maybe then there will be a change. As for a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the majority of the Israeli Jews do not see any way out of the conflict in the foreseeable future. There are some small groups in our correspondence. You mentioned Ami Elon. He has some people around him. They are going to launch a campaign about a defense agreement, regional defense agreement. But the chances that they will become a very strong political force, unfortunately, in my view, are very limited. This doesn't mean that they shouldn't try. Maybe you start, you start with few people, and maybe this will expand. But right now, the local state of mind is that to the most we can come to a prolonged ceasefire or some kind of a hudna, if you wish, but not a solution. Certainly not an independent, fully independent Palestinian state.
Okay. I will now inject three questions that come from the audience. The first question is, how much do people blame the government for what happened on October 7th, 2023? The second question, how is the attitude of the Israeli Palestinians war in Gaza developing? And the third question, are there segments of the public, and how strong would they be, that consider what is happening in Gaza a genocide?
Okay. Many blame the government, but they blame the government and also the army and the security agencies for failing to foresee what happened on October 7th. They don't blame them for doing things that because of that Hamas attacked Israel. Okay, there is a big difference between saying they are responsible because they didn't do anything to bring about peace. Here you have, I would say, percentage that can come up to maybe 5%. Okay, but they have many heavily see the government as responsible for not preparing in the desired way, with all the investment in technologies and whatever, that they didn't pay attention and they didn't read correctly what was happening on the other side. However, it's also political, because on the right, they say, okay, it's the government, it's the IDF, the army, and the Shabak that misled the government, or at least did not point to the government about the upcoming danger. Okay? On the left, they are saying they are using the IDF as a scapegoat, but basically there is this slogan, Ata harosh, Ata Hashem, you are the head, you are responsible, saying that Netanyahu may not be personally responsible, but he is responsible as a result of his being the prime minister. Okay? Israeli Arabs, the beginning, were very much afraid that they will be persecuted heavily by the Jewish majority. They were very afraid. It didn't happen in large numbers. And we did see certain phenomena that we didn't see in the past, like Israeli Arabs sending food to soldiers, Israeli Arabs volunteering for the medical emergency teams, and so on and so forth. There is a big difference between the intellectual elites. The intellectual and the political elites are much more radical in the criticism of the government and the police and Israel in general. Grassroots would rather, with all their empathy to what's happening in Gaza, of course they are empathic to what's happening in Gaza, much more than the Israeli Jews, but they just want to live their life quietly. They support the Palestinian state, but if you ask them, would you move to the Palestinian state, they say no way. And if people are talking about swap, about changing the borders in such a way that heavily populated areas where the Arabs live will be part of the Palestinian state, they said, no way, no way. We would like to stay Israeli citizens. Okay, because, comparing the standards of life and even corruption in the Palestinian state and in under the PA and in Israel, the situation in Israel is much better for them. Other people who see what's happening in Gaza as genocide amongst the Arabs, I suppose, I'm sure that there is a significant number, mostly at the intellectual elite level, that says among the Jews, we don't have any indications. I suppose that on the very radical left, you might find a certain number of people who would say, but it is on the individual level, not on any group level.
Okay, thank you very much. We're almost through our time, so let me maybe finish with the last question concerning the relationship to other countries, especially to the US. If I understand correct what you had said before, there is a majority of Israelis who say we should rely on the judgment of our political leaders in terms of how to conduct and how to deal with this situation. And I'm wondering, since years, don't Israelis see how dependent Israel is on the US, politically, militarily, financially, and so forth? I have trouble to follow that.
Well, as Netanyahu said, the Gentiles, we cannot trust the Gentiles. There is, although people know the facts, we asked them 3 days ago, who is a better candidate for the presidency of the United States from Israeli point of view? Amongst the Jews, the answers were 42% Trump, 32% Biden, 15% they are the same. Okay? So regardless of what President Biden did for Israel, which is unprecedented on all accounts, they still seem as, for example, committed to the progressive part of the Democratic Party. And there is this a feeling that the Americans are invested in Israel not because they love Israel only, they may love Israel, but because it is the only guaranteed foothold in the Middle East, because on certain accounts we do the job for them, and because now with the Houthis and the international commerce and coming from China and Iran and the axis of evil, Russia, Iran, and Hamas and the Houthis and whatever, Israelis will tell you they need us. I mean, we are also a laboratory for testing various kinds of weaponry for them. The funny thing, the ironic thing, not funny thing, is that the left is Israel is the only left that I know as a political scientist that is so pro-American as opposed to all other leftist groupings all over the world that do not see America as, the world big peace guarantor. So it's, as we say in Facebook, it's complicated. Relations, it's complicated.
Yeah, I think this is a good last word. I mean, the moderator is supposed to sum it up and give some kind of positive outlook. I think we will have to summarize it in very diplomatic terms, the way you just did it. It's complicated, and it will stay complicated if you look at the numbers, if you look at the situation. So I thank you very, very much, Tamar. I think you gave us a lot of insights that we have to continue to deal with. And I would like to thank very much the Heinrich-Böll Foundation and the New Israel Fund Austria And I would encourage our audience to please go to the website of New Israel Fund Germany and look in the different ways how you can support us, how you can support civil society in Israel, especially with donations, but there are other ways too. So I'll encourage you to visit our website. And thanks again, Tamar. Thanks again, everyone, for listening to us, and have a good evening or morning or day. Thank you.